Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and I'm here with Anthony Suau, the director of a new film, Organic Rising, coming to the Rio Theater in Santa Cruz. It's an exploration of the potential and the challenges facing the organic farming movement and some of the good reasons to expand what is still a nascent industry after all these years. Welcome, Anthony, to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what was your impetus for making the film?
I had lived in Europe for about 20 years and I moved back to the United States in the late 2000, 2008. And I started eating the same foods that I had eaten when I left 20 years ago and started taking weight and getting ill quite easily. And then I saw Food Inc. and read Michael Pollan's book, um,
The
Omnivore's
omnivore's
Dilemma,
dilemma.
and got a little bit of a taste of what was going on, a little bit of an understanding. And then I happened to meet an organic farmer while out in San Jose when I was out working on a Storage for Time magazine on the mortgage crisis back in 2008. I know that was a little bit later, maybe about 2010. And I kind of took an interest and was invited out to an organic farm in Santa Cruz and thought I would make a very short little video of explaining to consumers what that actually meant because I didn't have a clue what that meant at that time. And here I am 12 years later, um, uh, with a full feature documentary that's being played around the country and around the world, quite frankly, and getting a lot of good response. So it's been a long road. Um, I initially was able to meet and interview Jeff Larkey of Route One Farms, and I think that interview with Jeff was probably the interview that sort of really kicked off this film because once I had access to Route One, specifically out at uh, Waddell Creek, where he has that one of probably the most amazing organic farms in the country. Um, a lot of other farmers were opened up and started to give me access to their farms because Jeff is quite um, a legend in the organic industry, and we became good friends over the years, and really we're able to bring the film together. But it really all started in Santa Cruz, and I did a lot of work out there with Tom Brose at Live Earth Farms and um, Caleb Barron at Bogline, Joe Shermer at Dirty Girl Produce, all some of the most amazing farmers that I met as I then spent 12 years actually traveling all across the country looking at different organic farms and things and the way that they farm.
Just to put it in a bigger context, farming in this country has undergone a sea change, no matter how you look at it, over the past 3 or 4 decades. It's on one hand become incredibly much more mechanized, more smaller farms have been gobbled up by giant corporations. And then you have this other movement come in, kind of born out of the 60s, back to the land movement. And I'm wondering, if you could talk about how organic farming has evolved to become much more mainstream. It used to be considered kind of a fringy, just a bunch of hippies in their communes doing this. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So talk about that a little, about how the
Well,
changes have come about over this time.
yeah, even over the 12 years that I was documenting this movement, it has changed, and I would say even in the last 4 or 5 years, where we're mostly in post production, some very big aspects have also changed. But let's go back fundamentally to actually where we are. More than 90% of the United States is farmed with conventional agriculture. It still is the dominant form of agriculture by far. I mean, there's not organic doesn't even come close. I think in the United States, it's something like 1% of agriculture. So it's still a small portion of the agriculture. But what we did in Organic Rising, we understood quite quite early on that to explain organic agriculture, you really had to understand what conventional agriculture was as well. So I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, in the middle of Illinois, the Corn Belt, and I had gone to a farm every year when I was a kid that today is doing conventional farming with corn and soy and GMOs and all the pesticides. And I was given 100% access. I went back to that farm. I grew up with this farmer since we were, 5 years old, and so he gave me complete access to really look at what conventional agriculture is. And I think that that's one of the things that's really different about the film Organic Rising is that you get to look at both sides of what's going on in agriculture today, not only the organic side, but you get to see the conventional side. And he explains very specifically how what their process is, what their methods are, and what he feels the advantages are of what he does. And it's very much a commodity-driven form of agriculture. Most of what he did was going to either uh, animal feed, GMO animal feed, corn, or ethanol. Some of the soybeans was being shipped downriver for oil. So there was very little food that was entering into the food supply coming from that larger farm. And of course, he was using the GMO seeds, the glyphosate, the dicamba 2,4-D, and the synthetic fertilizers. And he explains that. And then we interviewed a number of scientists who have studied those, probably the most four predominant chemicals used in conventional agriculture today and what effects they're having on human biology and the environment. And so I think that's sort of the hard-hitting aspect of the film. We really don't shy away from showing you what conventional agriculture is. And in doing that, we're showing you what organics is not. And that's almost as important as showing you what organics is, because it's the real drive for why anybody should be buying organic, no doubt. I mean, once you see this, and once, we've shown it to audiences in a number of cities now, and we have discussion panels and Q&As after the film, and they're just explosive. People are, after watching a 2-hour film, at the end of the day, they're just so engaged, and they're so dynamic, and they're so passionate about what they've just seen that these discussion panels could go on all night. They just are so engaging. So we hope to have the same thing in Santa Cruz on the 3rd of May when we show at the Rio. I will be there. Jeff Larkey will be there. Tom Brose will be there. Jessica Beckett-Parr from CCOF. And all of these, after discussions, I've had certifiers with me on stage, and I found that incredibly beneficial, because that way we can directly answer people's questions precisely with really accurate answers about some of the issues that consumers are faced with when it comes to understanding organic. What we understand very quickly is that consumers are very confused about what is the process, what the label represents, what does regenerative mean, what's the deal with hydroponics, all these questions. The consumers are very astute, and they come at us and they want answers. And I think we've created a film and a platform where we can really give consumers very accurate and down-to-earth answers on the benefits of organic, but also some of the things that we need to look at about, what are problematic with organic today, and it can be addressed. It's evolving process. But we feel that we've created something that's given us a platform to help consumers. I always take the position of the consumer on stage, and in doing the film, my position when I did the film, I'm a journalist for many years, and I'm a consumer. So I'm not a farmer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an administrative person, I'm a consumer. So I always take pretty much the side of the audience, and what I want to see when I walk into a grocery store and I see that label, I want to know what that represents to me and to any consumer out there. And that's what we're trying to do and explain in the film.
So I'd like to unpack some of what you just said because there's so much there. You have two systems that sometimes interweave and sometimes overlap, and sometimes one threatens the other's livelihood. You have this heavily subsidized industry that's pretty much feeding the feedlots with non-food items that's made for cattle and for cars. You have a pesticide industry that's very lucrative in pushing these solutions on farmers. And you have farmers who are very deep in debt trying to pay off their equipment. And they're feeling like they have no choice but to farm conventionally. When you said, and this is, I think, a worldwide stat, that only 10% of farms are organic, is that correct? In the world?
No, in the United States, it's 1%.
Okay.
There is now a movement and a legal uh, law that they're trying to get 25% in Europe, I think by 2025 or something. I don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. They're in Europe, they are pushing very hard to grow the number of organic. We are not here, and I think that that's setting us back a bit. But one of the things that has happened recently that's very important is that the USDA has put $300 billion, I'm sorry, $300 million, excuse me, $300 million into helping farms who are farming conventionally to convert to organic. That's a big problem because there's a 3-year transition. If you're a conventional farmer to go to organic, to build your soils, to move away from the GMO seeds and the chemicals, you have to have your soil and your atmosphere and your environment free of chemical pesticides that are allowed in conventional, not in organic, free for 3 years. And so for that 3 years, there's a certain economic burden on any farmer. Where are you going to sell that product that you're growing? It's not conventional, it's not organic. There's a kind of loop. So there is has been this big amount of money and this big push to help farmers financially. And I think the USDA NOP National Organic Program is trying to help them technically move from conventional to organic. So that is new and it's very important, and it's one good step in that direction.
Well, you're showing this film in a region, as you said earlier in the interview, that's rich in organic farms. In fact, there's a lot of pioneering that's happened here with the Chadwick Garden and also with the Farm and Garden Apprenticeship Program at the University of California that has seeded the field with some very, so to speak, with some very experienced farmers doing something that, you could say goes back in time, but also is quite innovative. Can you talk about what it is that distinguishes, maybe three things that distinguish organic farming from the kind of pesticide heavy feedlot, monocropping that we were just talking about happening where you grew up in the Midwest?
Well, again, you're absolutely right. You are living in an area that has a cornucopia of organic farms, and these farmers are extraordinary, and you walk into the farmers market in Santa Cruz or any of the other, I think there are 5 farmers markets in Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, and some of the others. They're just loaded with some of the most amazing produce that is available in the United States, no doubt. I mean, you are really blessed where you live. But the basics are: number one, you have no GMOs, and they're not allowed in organic. Number two, you have very few synthetic pesticides that can be used in organic. In conventional, there are 900 synthetic pesticides. Glyphosate is just one. It's the most widely used, but it's just one. There's atrazine, there's 2,4-D dicamba. These are all have their impact on the environment and on human health. They move in the air, the water, the soil, they get into our food. These things are prevalent, particularly glyphosate. It's an ubiquitous chemical now in the environment. And, if you don't have to travel too far from Santa Cruz to get into the Salinas Valley, where you're going to see the massive use of these chemicals on a scale that's probably one of the largest scales in the United States, probably outside of the Central Valley.
Yeah,
So
we were driving up 101 all the way through Gonzales, and we just missed getting sprayed by an overhead pesticide plane that was spraying the fields in preparation for planting lettuce. So it's not just the Midwest, as you said, it's
it's
right now.
constant. I've seen Salinas Valley. I mean, I spent a lot of time working there, and there are a lot of organic farms down in there. Some of the big organic farms, like Earthbound, has a lot of fields down in there, and there are a number of them. And so you kind of wonder about the drift of those chemicals because they are so present in the atmosphere and the water and the soil and the environment down there that, how is that affecting what is called, what is being labeled and grown as organic in that region. But it's a big region. And again, you're just, also being inundated with pesticides and how those pesticides move. They are very volatile. They move in the air, the water, it's all related in the film. The scientists, have studied these kind of things. One of the main scientists we talked to was Tyrone Hayes out of Berkeley Institute, who has studied atrazine since the mid 90s, which is a heavy, heavy endocrine disruptor and moves very, very quickly in water, rainwater, groundwater, surface water. So, um, that I think is probably a real problem out in California and some of those areas. So,
And the Salinas
but
River, it dumps right into the Monterey Bay, which is a marine sanctuary, but you have
I
all
can't.
these endangered species living there that really can't do anything. They can't eat organic, right? They have to live in the environment that they're given, and we're giving them heavy loads of endocrine disruptors, which are bound to end up in our fish, right? I mean, we're going to eat them
Water supply.
eventually.
It's definitely going to end up in your water supply. That's just a given. It just moves so easily in water, according to all of the scientists that I've spoken to. But we also speak to prenatal doctors who are seeing uh, the effects of this in humans and the babies that he's delivering, all these sort of issues, endocrine issues, and the cancer related issue. I mean, it's just, it's one thing because some of these films and whatever books, they'll talk about one chemical, they'll talk about glyphosate does this and it's an endocrine disruptor. It's a it's a carcinogen and this and that, but we're not being exposed to just glyphosate. That's just not real. The reality is that it's much more complex than that. And we get into the mixture of chemicals that we're being exposed to and the effects that they're having on our DNA and the long-term sort of uh, ecological effects that they're having on uh, uh, generations going forward, and the effects. You can be exposed, but 3 or 4 generations out, that your exposure is affecting the offspring 3 or 4 generations down the road. So these chemicals are so dangerous, and these chemicals are already altering our DNA and who we are, and it's already happening. This is an enormous problem, and of course, this is the foundation of what organic is not, and what they're trying to avoid, and what I believe the consumer is trying to avoid first and foremost when they purchase organic. And for the most part, you can sort of rest assured that that's the case. I mean, there's going to be some exposure to some of these chemicals from time to time, but um, when you get into farms like Route One farms or Live Earth farms or some of these more advanced sort of uh, organic farms, they're not just following the USDA regulations. These farms are working well beyond they're talking about seed saving. They're talking about the effect of the entire environment around the farm and how the ecological structure is affecting the flavor and the taste of the plant and the food that you're growing. So again, there are a number of other farms like that around the country that I have visited, but they're more sparse around here. I think there's a concentration in the Santa Cruz area. There's also a good concentration upstate New York too, that has some really, really great organic farms. So
Let me reintroduce you. Anthony Suau is the director of Organic Rising. It's premiering in Santa Cruz, coming up shortly. and at the Rio Theater, and we're talking about the rise of organic farming and the opposite of our chemically induced agriculture. I want to talk about a couple of things that what you're talking about brings up. One is if the free market is supposed to fix things, if you believe that, organic should be widespread because people care about their health. And it should be, more than 1% in the United States. So why isn't it bigger? That's my first question. And then I want to get into some of the other questions, like why is it more expensive? Maybe that's why it isn't bigger. Does it have to be pricey, given that inflation is really biting into people's grocery bills? I imagine this is an interesting time to be talking about, pay a little more to people who are right on the edge of not having enough grocery money. So we'll talk about the economics of organic a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. As you said, the supply and demand is a little unbalanced in organic. Where the demand is much higher than the supply in the United States. So we are importing quite a bit of organic produce, particularly grains, animal feed grains coming in from overseas. Um,
I did not
and
know that. That's news.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
we do import quite a bit of organic, and there it's regulated overseas. There are the USDA does have certifiers that work over there, but there have been some questions about how well that's monitored. I know the last I spoke to the USDA, they're working hard to reinforce those rules over there and certifications. So that's important. But this question keeps coming up, and when you talk about conventional agriculture, as you said, that there's a lot of subsidies, something like 90 some $1 million a year going into. I'm sorry, I can't quote the figure off the top of my head. I know it's in the film, but I don't have it on the top of my head.
You'll have to come see the
Um,
film to get the exact quote.
yeah, watch the film to get the exact number, because it's a very hard number to find to research. It took me weeks to find that general number. So that's a lot of that. You're paying for a lot of that conventional food already before you even walk into the grocery store. Your taxes are going for that food. Where organic, it's more this is the price of what it costs the farmer to produce. And I think that when you look at organics, one of the most interesting things about it is that the farmers are very inventive, not only in the way that they farm and they manage their soils and all these things. It's also in the way that they've been able to market their produce. So you have, particularly in Santa Cruz, you have a number of farmers markets where you're going to have a little bit more of a direct cost relationship between what that product costs the farmer to grow and the consumer. And you have a lot of great CSAs that are going on there, and CSAs are a great investment for both the farm and for consumers, and they've proven to work really well over the last decades that they've been uh, implemented. And then you have something like Live Earth, where Live Earth Tom Rose at Live Earth has created something I think very few organic farmers who have been able to achieve, and they talk about it all the time, is he's created a community. It's a lot of the CSA people that take the CSA at Live Earth are, in fact, go to farm dinners, and they have very direct access with the farm. He has an educational program out there for kids. He does a lot of on-farm events and gets his community involved. So what you see on Live Earth is I've seen it on a couple of other farms in the United States, one in Florida and some other, but that's a rare thing that you really see people being engaged and having a direct relationship with the place where their food is being grown. And I would just add the other important thing that's going on in Santa Cruz is CCOF, California Certified Organic Farmers, that's a certifying organization that works between the USDA government National Organic Program and the farmers, and they go on to the farms every year, every single year. An organic farmer has to be inspected by a certifier, and they go over the records very tightly. I was able to CCOF allowed me to go on an inspection with them, accompanying inspection in Santa Cruz with Happy Boy Farms, and it was a really amazing thing to see. And CCOF has been a great supporter not only of the film in helping me make the film, but now they're really supporting the film and trying to get it out there because they understand that there's so much confusion from coming from consumers that the film can begin to answer some of those questions and set up some of these discussion and answer panels where people can get some answers. So CCOF is, again, that's a Santa Cruz based organization, but they certify farms all across the country, in Canada and in Mexico, I believe. And they're very dynamic, and a very, very important part of that structure that keeps our food safe. I really look at these certifiers as the people, as a consumer. These are the people between us and the farms that are, saying, okay, this food is safe to eat. It passes this certain criteria, and you can trust there's not glyphosate in it. There's no GMOs. There's, no atrazine here. So that's, these guys are like the unsung heroes of the organic movement. There's a number of certifiers across the country. I think there's 60 or 70 of them, and they, really enforce the USDA National Organic Program rules with the farmers. So I give them a lot of credit. They're very knowledgeable. They're very good at what they do, and so that's, a very important dimension of the organic process.
We're almost out of time. Anthony Suau, the director of Organic Rising, but I would like to ask you one more question. Is there something we can learn from the European effort to increase on a big scale organic farming legislatively that might spur or inspire our own agricultural industry to switch over more to organics?
Well, the European market is a little different. It has some positive and negative aspects about what's going on with it. Number one, a lot of the chemicals that we talk about in the film, the atrazine and I believe dicamba and some of the others, are forbidden in European agriculture. And a lot of that is due to the scientists that are in the film, their research, and that stuff has been eliminated to a degree. They still have glyphosate, and it's still a problem over there with some chemicals, particularly on a lot of wineries. But they don't allow GMOs to be used to grown food, but they do import U.S. GMO conventional product for animal feed, or that's legal. So there's some good things going on over there, some bad things. The impetus to move to 25% organic, which is also an issue that can offset climate change, because once you build your soil and you build the microbiome in the soil and you make it richer, you're going to retain more carbon in that soil, and so it's going to pull down that carbon, and you're going to reverse global warming and climate change. So that's inherent in organic agriculture, or it should be, for the most part. If a farmer is truly organic and they're really taking care of their soils, or they should be taking care of their soils, because that's going to be the benefit to them. Once your soils are well maintained and built up, and you have a big microbiome, you're going to have less problems with pest infestations, with weed infestations, and all these other things. So it allows them to be in a place where they don't have to use those kind of chemicals quite as frequently as soils that are not maintained on the conventional farms.
So you think that banning certain chemicals has shifted things in Europe much more quickly than, say, some legislative incentive to switch over? What about financial incentives? We certainly subsidize a lot of things like corn for corn syrup and animal feed in our country. What about subsidies for organic? Is there any possible
Well, again,
future?
I think the most important aspect right now is, and it is being addressed. It wasn't being addressed when I was making the film, but it has been addressed in it's not in the film. It's mentioned in the film as a possibility, is to move those conventional farms, giving them an economic incentive to move to organic. Because what you'll see in the film is a farmer who's growing conventional corn, he's making $4 or $5, $3 or $4 a bushel 10 years ago. Today, it's a little higher because of the war in the Ukraine, but the organic farmer makes almost twice as much on the same product because it's in such demand. So there is a big economic incentive I believe that organic corn feed is now going for something like $14 a bushel compared to around $7 a bushel for conventional. Now, $7 a bushel, they can make a good living on that, that's no doubt. But $14, double the price, with basically the same input costs. I mean, there are different costs, but the amount is somewhat similar, is what we found. So there is that incentive. It's just that 3-year period that is a real barrier for any farmer to move over. And but it is also, I have to say, it's also a very psychological and cultural problem, because once a farmer starts in the Midwest starts doing stuff like no-till or some of the organic practices, his neighbors are basically, oh, look at Jimmy over there, he's doing no-till. And they almost are, I don't want to use the word ostracized, but kind of in their community when you start moving away from a process that everybody for miles and thousands of miles around you is using that process, and they're basically locked into. So that's a kind of cultural thing that's going on. That's a hard barrier to cross.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the film at the Rio. It's May 3rd at 5 p.m. in Santa Cruz at the Rio Theater. Organic Rising is the title of this feature documentary, coming out soon to a theater near you. Anthony Suau has been my guest. Thank you, Anthony. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you very much. I'll be there on the 3rd, so have your questions ready, everyone.